So here's Valerie with her personal story. We can and we do.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning for those of you on the West Coast. My name's Val. I'm up here in Delaware with the Restart program. And I'm also a mom, a fiance, a person, and someone on methadone who is thriving in life. I grew up with depression, was forced into counseling for many years, got picked on at school as I was always overweight. Started smoking at a young age. I was only 14 when I started smoking. I did go to college for 1 year back then as I drank that year away and came back and fell in love. Unfortunately, the person I fell in love with was an addict. He said he was in recovery, which happened to not be true. I did not get into my addiction at that point. Just kind of watched him downward spiral. And with a 10-month-old child, after being beaten severely many times by my husband, he ended up overdosing and dying. I was widowed at 21. But that wasn't before he showed me after knee surgery how good that feeling was of the Percocet that I got. And that kind of started my whole addiction. And it was on and off from there with my pill usage over time. I went on, was in a relationship for many years, would use pills here and there, but nothing severe until I ended up in a relationship with another abuser. In my second domestic violence situation, I ended up having a fractured eye socket. Couldn't tell you the number of times my ribs got broken. And instead of me going to the hospital to get looked at, my boyfriend at the time ended up giving me heroin, which is how I ended up on it and starting my addiction, and it was off running. My addiction turned me into somebody I didn't like. I was stealing from my family, neglecting my children. I wanted out of the relationship I was in, but felt stuck because I was in my addiction and we were using together. I had nowhere to go as I had alienated everybody in my life who had cared about me. And I also felt at that point, I didn't deserve any better, that I was where I was supposed to be because of what I was doing. So I dealt with that for about 3 years until I wasn't so much tired of getting high, and the feeling I was tired of the game I was playing in order to be able to get high. I was tired of stealing. I was tired of being out running and not being with my kids. It was a difficult life. But because of the relationship I was in, I couldn't go to rehab. He wouldn't let me. I couldn't leave my kids. They wouldn't have been safe. So I did turn to the clinic and I got onto methadone and it saved my life. I don't know where I would have been if I didn't have that. From the methadone, I did end up turning into a bad cocaine addict for a few years, but that's because I wasn't putting my work in. I was skipping my counseling sessions, excuse me. I was just basically going to dose and taking my medicine and then forgetting about any other part of my recovery, which is not what I needed to do. So at that point, I was still feeling worthless, still feeling abused. He was still using. I was being forced to get money for his drugs, my drugs, still going to the clinic daily, but not able to get away from the cocaine. And that's when I came across the man I am now engaged to. He saved me. He saved my children. We met at the clinic. He is also in recovery. He's on Subutex and doing well himself. He saved me and my kids, got us out of that situation. We did use the cocaine together for a little while until the day he looked at me and said he could not watch me hurt myself anymore and told me that he was done. And if I wasn't, that That was on me, but that we couldn't be together if I wasn't. So I told him if he was done, I was done. That was October 5th of 2017. So October 6th this year, I will be 4 years sober. And that is when I started putting in the work. That's when MAT truly saved me and why I am here. That is when you see my beautiful babies on the screen right now, my dogs. I got my life back. I utilized the MAT. I utilized the clinic. I started going to my counseling. I started going to groups, and that's what I had to do. MAT really does get a bad rap, but that's because a lot of times the only time people really pay attention to it is when somebody's not doing it right, when somebody's doing bad. That's when you hear about it. And that's why it's so misunderstood. You can't just take the medicine every day and think you're going to be okay. It's not how it works. You have to put in the work on your recovery. That's why it's not just another drug that I'm putting into me. It is my medicine. I'm using it along with my treatment to be okay, to be able to live my life. People always say that it was my choice to use, and I will be the first to tell you, an addict, they have two choices in their life, in their addiction. That first time they pick up and when they choose to stop. Those are the only two choices we have. Other than that, our brain is off to the races and will not let us. We are wired to be addicts. We are wired to be alcoholics. So I am what I am today because of MAT, because of my methadone, and because of working on my sobriety. I did lose my kids for a couple of years. I've now had them back for about 2.5 years. And my oldest will unfortunately be, I hate to admit I'm old enough, 18 next year and going into the military. And my kids never gave up on me. I have my own home. I have a car. I not only have a job, but I have a career. I'm engaged. I have my dogs. I have my family back. And it's a great feeling. I'm also going to school now to be a drug and alcohol counselor, maintain a 4.0 my first semester. And it's all because I have the power to be okay every day. And that wouldn't have happened if I didn't have the clinic to turn to. I know a lot of people look down on, especially methadone. And I beg you guys, please look more into it. Don't just down it. Don't think that everybody that is on MAT are bad, are just substituting, because that's not what we're doing. What you see on screen now, I wrote to my father 4 years ago when I was inpatient at a mental health facility after trying to commit suicide, because I was at my bottom. I'd lost my kids, I'd lost my livelihood, I'd lost everything. And I wrote to him that day on his birthday that I was going to get it together. And basically, I wasn't just saying it, I was going to do it. And that's what you see at the bottom. My dad decided to add to my I can, and I will, that I did. And it's great to have that, to have my family proud of me again, and to have them supporting me and telling me what a good job I'm doing. The most important I got back from using MAT is I got me back, the person that I truly am. So I beg those of you out there who do not understand medicated assisted treatment, be open to learning about it. Please listen today. Listen to all the good things that are being done with this treatment. Listen to the truth. Please try and look past the stigmas that you know, the biases that you've heard, and the myths that are running rampant, because that is not what needs to be concentrated on. Concentrate on those of us who it has truly helped. Those of us who are living our lives, who are here to still be with our families, still raise our children, still move on and try and help others. Pay attention to us so that you all can see what MAT can truly do. I know MAT is not for everyone. And I tell people this all the time. If you're not willing to put in the work, it's not going to help you. If you're not willing to do those other parts of recovery that you need to do anyway, it's not going to help. But for those who are willing to take the medicine as an addition to the rest of their recovery practices, you can thrive, you can get your life back, and you can move on, and you can make your family proud too. So please, when you see somebody else standing in line for that clinic, don't look down on them. Commend them for taking the step in the right direction. Thank you guys. Have a great afternoon.
Well, welcome back, everyone. We are running a bit earlier than what we had planned. So we are actually going to take a few questions for Valerie. So if anyone has some questions for Valerie, if you would please put them in the chat box, I'll be happy to read those to her, and she can respond to everyone. I have one actually, if oh, somebody has one. Okay, this is from Catherine Scott. She says, what has been the most important thing you have learned since being on the path to recovery?
To not listen to those who want to down you. I hear a lot about why I'm wrong for being on methadone, that I'm not really in recovery, those kind of things. And you have to learn to kind of brush that off and know that you're really in recovery and that you're not doing anything wrong, that you had to do it the way you had to do it. So that's the biggest thing that I learned, is I had to grow some thick skin, and you have to trust in yourself that you made the best decision for you.
Thank you. Benjamin Brin asks, how do you find your best supports?
Really, you just got to kind of pay attention. You have to look around you to those who are truly there for you, those who really have your best interest at heart. Sometimes it will surprise you who is actually a support for you that you didn't think was. So really, it's just all about paying attention and sometimes asking questions and seeing how people respond. And if they respond in a way that is uplifting and positive, then you know that that's somebody you can turn to.
That's great. Well, we've got the questions coming, Valerie. So Dr. Shana says, what struggles did you experience in your path to recovery, and how did you get past them?
I think the biggest struggle that I had was learning how to do it right. Like I said, when I first got onto MAT, I thought it was just to go take my medicine and that was going to be like the miracle answer, and that I wasn't going to have to work on my recovery. So my mental health was also a struggle for me. And in addiction, unless you're treating both, you're not going to overcome either. So especially being in the domestic violence situations I was in, I had to learn how to pay attention to when I needed a break. And also, I really had to concentrate on doing what I needed to do for my mental health so that my addiction could also be on the path the right way.
That's some great insight there. Okay, here's one from Vincent. He says, when you say MAT is not for everyone, what are some of the characteristics of someone who it is for?
Somebody who is willing to put in the work, someone who is going to follow through with their counseling, who is going to take care of their mental health, who isn't looking to just be okay until they can find their next fix. Is somebody who is truly ready to be in recovery. If you're not really ready to be in recovery, then you're going to abuse the MAT and it's not going to really help. So you really have to be ready and willing to do what you got to do.
Thank you. You're getting a lot of positive feedback, by the way, Valerie. There's a
I
lot of
see
thank
that.
yous,
Thank you, everybody.
wonderful things in the chat from your presentation. Um, Joy asks, how do your experiences from your journey in substance use through recovery, how does that translate into your work now?
Especially being on the Restart team where I'm working with people who have just gotten out of treatment, either for mental health or substance use, it helps me to relate to them. I really can be somebody that they can turn to that they know is not going to judge because I've been there, and I let them know that I've been there. If I'm at our RRC taking referrals, I will tell the people I'm talking to, I was sitting there 4 years ago. That was me. I know what it's like to sleep in that recliner. When I'm with somebody who's going through withdrawal, I've been there. I know it sucks. It just really helps me relate to the people that I'm working with. And I think that that also helps them trust me more. And it lets them know that I'm somebody that they can turn to and not somebody else who's going to judge them.
That's great. And it's very important from what I've seen for individuals who are seeking treatment or even considering treatment and recovery, to know that they have wonderful peer resources, somebody who can come alongside and say, I've done this.
Mm-hmm.
Let me walk alongside with you and share with you what I've learned. As a clinician, I can tell you that for me, I can stand beside somebody all day and work with them on therapy and tools, but really a key piece is our peer support, which is why RI is such a big proponent of peer support, because that is just such a huge assistance and help for individuals who need that extra feedback and motivation. So that's excellent.
It really does help the clients, participants, guests, whatever they're called, wherever they're at in the program, to know that they have somebody that truly understands what they're going through. Mm-hmm. So it helps them trust RI as their treatment provider. That they know that there's somebody they're working with them who is going to be empathetic and sympathetic and can honestly say, look, I know it sucks and this is what I had to do, and it might not help you, but you can try. So it definitely does help them to have us peers that can kind of walk through them and guide them through what we went through as well, and what helped us and what didn't. I think it's a good tool.
Yes. We have a question from Catherine saying, how important is it that you know your triggers?
It is extremely important, so that I do not put myself in a situation to where I'm going to trigger myself and don't have to. Some of my triggers I kind of can't get away from, to be honest with you. I'm, in all honesty, a huge trigger of mine is to see my veins. So I have to watch myself, and if I see myself kind of looking at them, I gotta kind of direct myself somewhere else. And it's a coping skill. I gotta use my coping skills. And but it is extremely important to know what is going to trigger you, so that if you are noticing that you're starting to go towards that trigger, or that you're going to be in a situation with that trigger, you're prepared to handle it. So I think that's one of the biggest parts of being in recovery, is knowing your triggers. And also knowing how to cope with them.
Yes. Dr. Chuck says, do you feel you can share your story as a champion for recovery in your daily work, or are there still barriers that we need to overcome?
For the most part, I feel like I can. You're always going to run into the people who do not agree with MAT, the ones who do believe the myths, the ones who think that you're not truly clean, that you're not in recovery, that you're still using by being on it. So I think there's always going to be barriers, because you're never going to change everybody's minds. So it's just something you have to prepare for. And doing stuff like this is great, because hopefully if me talking right now changed one person's mind that's watching, then we did our job today, because that's one more person that we don't have to worry about them looking down on people.
Mm,
And that's going to be accepting of what our is trying to do with inductions and everything, and that we know will support the guests that are doing it. So, I mean, I am very open with my story. I don't hide. People that know me, I will tell anybody that walks up and wants to listen. I will tell them my story and tell them what I've been through, and I don't hide much about it. But there are still those people who I feel like I can't be honest with. So, and I honestly, Dr. Chuck, I don't know where we're going to get rid of everybody like that. And it's just something that you have to be prepared for.
Mm.
So I definitely think as a company, we're moving in the right direction though.
Thank you for that feedback, Valerie. There's another question that we'll get to, but I would like to say, there's a comment here that I'd love your feedback on, really, Valerie. Melody Worsham writes, I have coworkers who are using MAT as a pathway to recovery. I hear people say they are cowardly or weak, as though only white knuckling and suffering are the only acceptable pathways to recover. What would your response be to that?
Those are the people that we are aiming to talk to. Those are the ones that I am hoping I can say, would you rather me still be using? Would you rather me be dead? Would you rather my kids not have their mother? Because there are those of us that we didn't have another way to go. I couldn't have been sick for days. I had kids to take care of. I had to watch my back. And like I had said when I was talking, I couldn't go to rehab. So what was I supposed to do? It was either keep using or get the help. So, yeah, it's sad to see that people have to down others for choosing the path that they choose. Just because you don't agree with it doesn't mean it's wrong. And I tell people that a lot. So, and just because you don't understand it doesn't mean it's wrong. So we're moving in the right direction, but I think until more people get to see the good side of MAT and the success stories of it, there's always going to be those who think that we took the cheap way out, the easy way out. Trust me, it's not easy. It is very much not easy.
Well, you mentioned, I wanted to piggyback on this, and maybe we might be able to get one or two more questions in after this, but you've mentioned a couple of times doing the work. We know the medication is part of it. It stabilizes the brain, but what part of it, for those individuals in the audience who don't have a medical background, who aren't familiar with substance use, except maybe they know somebody who struggled with it or have heard of somebody who struggled with it, what does it look like? What is the work that you're referring to? What does that look like for a person in recovery? What needs to change?
You have to be willing to change your people, places, and things. That is a big part of it. I cut off people that I thought were my best friends. Mm-hmm. Like I had told you guys, my fiance was ready to cut me off until I quit using. You have to do what's best for you. And somebody who's truly ready to be in recovery won't talk about glorify their addiction. They won't still have their mentality of being like in the game. They won't be trying to manipulate people for money. Those kind of things, the stuff that you had to do every day just to get your drugs. Mm. So if I'm answering you correctly, that if you really want to know if somebody is truly ready and using it the right way, then you'll see them improving. Mm. And you'll see that drug mentality leave. Mm. you'll see them trying to move forward with life and trying not to look back. I very much get upset when somebody will bring up that, well, my grandmother, for example, like even with this job, when I got it, she goes, "What, do they know you're still on drugs?" I'm not still on drugs. So somebody who is truly ready will stand up for themselves and will do everything they can to separate from the person they used to be.
Thank you. I think there's a couple of questions in here that I think we may punt to Dr. Browning. Dr. Browning, are you available to jump in real quick?
Sure. You're gonna
Great.
put me in earlier than
here.
on
Yeah.
the spot.
Let's see here. So Joy was asking, I wonder what Dr. Chuck would say from his medical perspective about characteristics regarding who MAT is great for.
So first of all, before I answer anything, I just want to thank Val so much for having the courage to stand up and talk about this in front of everyone. It was not long ago that one of our peers' staff was not comfortable in sharing their story, and wrote a really powerful article along with Stephanie that was published on Crisis Talk about the role of being in recovery and on MAT while working in a place that should be able to be supportive of that. And so Val, you and Whitney later on today being able to share that is so powerful. One of the things that you asked about that question to Val was who is a candidate. In reality, from the FDA and approval of medications, is MAT is a candidate for people with opioid use disorder. And so, I love what Dr. Monica Weldon related to thinking about insulin. Granted, diabetes is a chronic illness like opioid use disorder is, and each thing is unique. But I think it's a really helpful way to evaluate the way that we have stigma and some myths about the way we approach opioid use disorder. And so when I think about, the idea that everyone that has diabetes, especially if it requires insulin, for example, as a shot to be able to help lower your sugar, we don't say that insulin doesn't work to help lower sugar when people who are prescribed insulin are struggling with their diet or have something that they have to take prednisone, for example, and it flares up their sugar and overwhelms their insulin. There's not shame and attacking of that person for their sugar being high, usually in that case. And yet, when you have MAT, which is gold standard, evidence-based best practice for helping people save lives, stay retained into treatment, be able to work, be able to stay out of incarceration, avoid certain horrible medical comorbidities that go along with opioid use disorder, and get recovery in their life. It clearly is far and above the most evidence-based practice, but yet there's a lot of stigma about taking medications to be able to treat that we don't do with insulin. And as Val said, you really see a lot of the myths and questions poked at people who haven't had 100% success in their treatment. And yet, in medicine, if we can help somebody reduce their blood pressure a little bit or improve their sugar somewhat, even if it's not perfect, it's often easily celebrated as a victory and something to move forward and celebrate and cheer on, not beat up the treatment or beat up the person for that not working well. And when people come back to the hospital because they have an exacerbation of their sugar, hopefully they're not going to be treated as failures and attacked for having had their sugars get out of whack in that moment. You're going to regroup and work together collaboratively to figure out what we can do different the next time to help protect from that happening. And I hope that that's something, especially at RI, where we do our peer powered practices and embrace those. And Joy and I are going to talk about that a little bit later, that we can really work on being champions of that so that we are collaborative with folks and understand where they're coming from that are in that pathway and going.
Thank you, Dr. Chuck. I think it sounds like you're saying that if someone has an opioid use disorder, then they are a candidate for medication assisted treatment if they're willing to engage in that. And I remember I think it's part of the 12 steps where they say awareness precedes change. And sometimes you have to be in that awareness, and the awareness has to grow. And if you can get somebody to come through a door and start to engage in treatment, or even consider engaging in treatment, then you've got the ability to motivate, encourage the individual on their path to recovery, because recovery is a path. It's not a one and done. You don't go in for surgery, they remove the piece of your brain that says, okay, I have this addiction disorder, and now, oh, bada bing, bada boom, you're done. Doesn't work that way. And so I think that's a great point, that access is very important, and we need to make sure that, you know, we are welcoming of people who have opioid use disorder and saying, we do have the ability to assist you. This is what we have to offer. And we are here to come alongside you and help you on this journey. So I really appreciate that perspective and feedback.
Well, it aligns with all of our principles of the RIA. You know, we work on, and Joy and I are talking about, we work on safety and creating a safety environment. We'll talk about how we do that. But our second most important thing that we always want our staff focusing on is how to be engaging and connect. And so the premise of this whole summit, as we go forward, if you're thinking about that, is how can we help spread a contagious environment of being champions for engaging all the things that we serve. But if you don't know that much about opioid use disorder, how can we have champions that do that and engage with that? And then as we do it, you know, using that peer-powered practices of being collaborative, understanding where people are coming from. I think, Joy, we're going to talk about in that trauma-informed care in terms of inclusivity, looking at diversity and how we make sure that we're approaching people of all walks that are coming in our communities that struggle with opioid use disorder. So all these things align together in our ROA to support what we do.
Perfect. We have one more question, Dr. Chuck. Again, I'm going to put this to you because it's more of a medical bent. And I'm going to give you about 4 minutes to answer this, okay? So, but one of the questions was that, I'm trying to find it, but one of the individuals said, you know, they have heard in trainings that MAT is supposed to be more for short term rather than longer term. And so could you speak to whether or not there's a preference as to an individual should be in for 1 to 2 years or 6 months or 10 years or however long?
Yeah, I think it's a unique journey, like you talked about, Susan, that that when you look at recommendations from SAMHSA and other guidelines, it's clearly not meant to be something that you rush through and get off as soon as possible, as if it's dangerous. It takes, oftentimes when people finally start to present to get help for that, sometimes their initial use with MAT is not necessarily successful right away in complete resolution of being able to deal with people, places, and things, and being a place without that. And so usually when I'm working with someone who wants to get off of MAT that's been successful, we're exploring, you know, what are the things that are in place if they choose to want to look at that. And so I've seen people successfully do that over time. But I also, you know, there's evidence of people if in New York who started, you know, decades ago in treatment with methadone that are still successfully in recovery, doing well on that treatment. And there's no recommendations or evidence that suggests that you need to get off of it right away either. I mean, again, going back to chronic illness mode, you know, you wouldn't necessarily, sometimes people with diabetes are able through diet and exercise to control their sugar and not need medications, even though they were on them at a period of time. And sometimes people cannot, and they need to continue in treatment along with lifestyle changes that they're working on, even when they're doing lifestyle changes. So I think it's having an openness and an understanding that it's now pretty much considered a pretty longer term treatment. And as you know, it takes a long time, especially with opioid use disorder, to be able to help rewire the brain once you have been using opiates for a while. And medication helps stabilize that so that people can work on that journey, but it can be a long process. And sometimes, you know, that's important. I'll say one other medical thing about that is one of the things that can be a challenge for people who do decide to come off of MAT after being on it for a time is going too rapidly off and getting into opioid withdrawal, and that triggering challenges that recreate risk for relapse if they don't communicate with their providing team about, hey, I'm having too much withdrawal, we need to slow down this taper or things like that. So that's just an important kind of tip as well if you're thinking about that and in that situation.
Not to mention the increased vulnerability to fatal overdose in that situation as well.
Correct.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Valerie and Dr. Chuck, for weighing in. Valerie, thanks for your courage with sharing your story.